And I'd like to thank all of you for being here, and I'd like to thank my predecessors here because they set up the stage nicely for me. I'm basically just going to agree with them, but in different words. For me, the lesson of the last two elections, when I look at the Middle East, is that the American people want a more restrained American policy in the Middle East. They want us to pursue our interests, for sure, but they want to avoid the kind of grand projects that the administration I worked in, George W. Bush, represented. I think President Obama campaigned on this idea, and I think President Trump campaigned on it. President Trump had a critique of both Obama and Bush. I think you can kind of sum up his slogan from the campaign, or if we turned his message into a slogan, it would be, "I'm going to do a lot more with less. I'm going to do a lot more than Barack Obama achieved, because Barack Obama appeased our enemies. I'm not going to do that, but I'm going to do it. I'm going to get a lot more, but I'm going to get it with much less effort than George W. Bush, who expended blood and treasure in pursuit of these fanciful ideas like democratizing the Middle East." Now, that's a great slogan to win on. Offering people more with a lot less sacrifice is great electoral politics, but translating it into policy in the Middle East is a challenge. And I'd like to discuss some of that in a kind of a historical context. It's a challenge, but I don't think it's impossible, by the way. I don't think it's impossible at all. But I think it means that we have to kind of rediscover the roots of successful American grand strategy. And I would hold up the successful strategy as the strategy of containment of the Soviet Union that the United States came up with after World War II. That was really our arrival as a great power, as a superpower. And we thought about what our role was in the world, and we came up with a way to perform it. And I think that we have really, in our national debate, we have fallen away from what I consider to be the roots of those ideas. So let me revisit it a little bit. In his book, Present at the Creation, Dean Acheson discusses how they came up with the grand strategy that became known as containment. And they spent a lot of time sitting around discussing what it is that the United States represented on the world stage as opposed to its great competitor, the Soviet Union. And what I find interesting about this debate is we often talk these days about, in the Middle East in particular, should we be pursuing our values or our interests? And of course, if you're going to say we're going to be a much more restrained power, then it's going to be interests are going to fall by the wayside a little bit. It's going to be more. Values are going to fall away a little bit. It's going to be more interest-based. But that doesn't tell you very much, because you still have to define what your interests are. That's an intellectual process. They don't just kind of rise up out of the ground. And it's interesting that in defining interest, at the time of putting together the grand strategy of containment, they defined it extremely narrowly. And I'd like to read some Acheson here, because it's very instructive. So he asks, what was the Soviet approach, and how was it different from the American approach? And Acheson says, "It was true and understandable to describe the Russian motivating concept as being that no state is friendly which is not subservient. And ours is, no state is unfriendly which, in return for our respect for its rights, respects the rights of other states. While our own society felt no compulsion to bring all societies into conformity with it, The Kremlin hierarchy was not content merely to entrench its regime, but wished to expand its control directly and indirectly over people within its reach. Now, when I read that, I hear a complete rebuke of the concept of a rules-based international order, or let's say a partial rebuke. Because when people these days say rules-based international order, I think they are talking about a global system to which everyone must conform. And Acheson is saying something different here. He's saying, we don't represent the system that everyone has to conform to. We say, as long as you don't go around molesting your neighbors and trying to dominate others, we're okay with you. You don't have to have a capitalist system. You don't have to have our values. In fact, you don't even have to share a lot of our interests. You just have to agree not to cause trouble for your neighbors. And the emphasis here as well, I think, which is very important, is on the security side. I think the generation after World War II understood that what people wanted from us more than anything else was security. And I think we have completely lost all of this idea since the end of the Cold War, or at least it's gotten very very vague in a lot of people's minds. I remember after, as I served in the Bush administration and as the Democrats were putting together their slogans against us, both in 2004 and then again in 2008, they worked their way up to this idea of smart power. Do you remember this? This was Joe Nye's. The original incarnation of Joe Nye's book was soft power. And the idea was that the Bush administration was overly reliant on the military and on hard power. So what's the alternative? Soft power. So they started playing around with that, but that's no good, because soft power suggests weakness, and we don't want to say we're the people of weak power, or we're the people, we're for a flaccid foreign policy. We don't want that. So they changed it, and Joe Nye he wrote the same book again, but rebranded it as smart power, and that was then what they ran on in 2009. And there was a lot of talk about the Middle East, and we learned from the whole smart power effort with it. The people in the Middle East really love us for our values and not for our military. So what a load of hooey, right? The Middle Easterners don't like us. They don't want to be like us for the most part. Some of them like us, some of them don't. But what they really want from us is our power. Our military power, and they want us to help protect them from their rapacious enemies. That's where the emphasis should be. But since the end of the Cold War, we have forgotten this very, very simple thing that all of the founders of our successful grand strategy understood, because they had to build the military and win World War II, and then were threatened militarily by the Soviet Union. So they were always focused on the main game. We after 9/11, convinced ourselves that the problem was the lack of democracy in the Middle East, so we had to democratize the whole area. We quickly despaired of that. And then we decided, the problem was we used too much hard power, and we really need to retreat, as Cliff said. And then we realized, actually, retreat doesn't work either. And so now we're in this Trumpian range of we're going to do more with less. Now, the problem here is that we have two overriding electoral demands that are inescapable, but in great tension with each other. One is the American people have said no more George W. Bush-style invasions of the Middle East. We're not going to remake this region with our military. At the same time, we have seen that an Obama-style retreat creates chaos, which our competitors, both local parochial competitors, but also the great power competitors of Russia and China, are going to exploit to our great disadvantage. So we need to hold our positions of power, but we need to do it with less military effort. How do we do this? There's only one way. There's only one way. It's been around since Thucydides. I wish I could tell you that I made up this concept. I didn't. It's an old one, but we have forgotten it. It's called allies. That's what we do. If we're not going to do it ourselves, but it needs to be done, then we have to find somebody else to do it. Right. Now, when you start looking at the potential allies in the region, there are not that many who can stand up and do the job. Now, one stands up immediately to say, yes, that's an ally, and that's Israel. And Israel's a good one as well, because American people, with the exception of the, 4 or 5 junior congresswomen, they like Israel. They like Israel. It's good electoral politics, and Israel has this, in addition to being liked by the American people, it has another attractive quality, which is the Israelis, basically, they don't say it in these words, but they say what Winston Churchill said at the beginning of World War II, you give us the tools and we'll finish the job. So if you help us build our own power, we'll take care of the business, and you don't have to send your boys, your women and men now, I guess, over here to do the job. That's also a winning statement. Now, once you get past Israel, it gets a little bit, it gets dicier. Now, if you're the Obama administration, you look at this big mess from Baghdad to Beirut, and you say, if only there was a big, solid power in that area that we could work with to kind of stabilize everything, things would be a lot easier. And then they looked around and they found it, and it's Iran. They said, if we could just recalibrate Iran a little bit, open up the trap door on their back and change the dials a little bit, then we can be friends again, and everything will be great. Well, that didn't work. Well, at least I don't think it worked, and I think most people in this room probably, well, I don't know about this room, but most Republican voters don't think it worked. So you're left then with only 2 others really. And that is, where I saw Yoram here. Is Yoram here now? Yoram, he's right behind you. Oh, the 2 of you together. These 2 gentlemen wrote an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal in which they said the wrong answer, and they said not Turkey. And not Turkey is the wrong answer. Turkey is the right answer. It's Israel, Turkey, and Saudi Arabia. These are the only 3 powers in the region who have the capability to project power beyond their borders, and on which we can possibly build a regional order, regional stability, enough just to keep the wolves at bay. That's all we're trying to do. That is all we have. And that is the challenge, and rightly understood. Don't listen to these gentlemen, even though they put together the conference, and we owe our participation here to them. Don't listen to them. That is all we have. Now, this is not an attractive message for many to hear, because they don't like each other. The Israelis, the Saudis, and the Turks. The Saudis hate the Turks hate the Saudis, the Turks hate the Israelis, the Saudis hate the Israelis but are pretending like they don't now. And so it's a mess. It's a total mess. That is the Middle East. That is the Middle East. And so if you're talking to any constituency, I run into this all the time, if you're talking to Jews and you say Turkey good, they say get out of here, right? If you're talking to Arabs and you say Israel good, they say get out of here, right? It's the job of the United States, properly understood, the job of the United States in the Middle East, if it's going to carry out a more restrained foreign policy, is to help these allies defend themselves and stabilize the region around them, and to be the shock absorber between them, to assign them roles and missions and a kind of general picture of where we're trying to go while keeping them away from each other because they all hate each other. That is our job in the Middle East. We're not there to democratize, and we're not there to tinker too much with all of the little conflicts on the ground. The conflicts on the ground are endless, and they can never be solved. And the Middle Easterners will forever be sucking us into their little parochial fights. So Abu this and Abu that, don't worry about them. Keep your eye on the states. It's amazing when we talk about the Middle East, it's amazing how we quickly stop talking about states. It's all about states, and there are only 3 good ones. Again, Israel, Saudi Arabia, and yes, Turkey, right? Everything else, forget about it. Thank you.